Hi, this is Anita McGann. I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about competitive positioning. There are really two major questions about business unit strategy that we've been tackling. The first is, how structurally attractive is the industry? For this question, we've been using 5 forces analysis to try to understand whether or not an industry creates and captures value. Now we're going to turn to a second question, which is, what is the firm's relative position in an industry? How is the firm doing relative to its rivals here? Does it have a competitive advantage? Is it outperforming its peers, or does it have a competitive disadvantage? Is it underperforming its peers? A tie is considered to be a competitive disadvantage. Now, no matter what's happening with the industry, we see firms all the time achieving competitive advantage or disadvantage. In other words, what we're talking about in the second instance here, for the second question, is how is the firm doing relative to its peer group within the industry? Is it doing well or doing poorly? And in all sorts of businesses, we have diversity in competitive positions here. Of course, the theme that we're focusing on is, how can a firm develop a sustainable advantage? What is it that firms do to achieve a long-term advantage relative to their peers? All right, the introduction here relies on this idea that more than one firm in a business can achieve a competitive advantage here. So if we have 4 firms labeled A, B, C, D here. 2 of them have competitive advantages, firm A and firm D, and 2 have disadvantages, firm B and firm C. There really are multiple routes to achieving competitive advantage, and I'm going to talk about those in just a minute. The key here is to recognize that if you're studying firm A, you don't necessarily want to compare it to firm D if you're seeking to understand its competitive advantage. You'd want to compare it to B and C, because what you're doing is asking the question, why is this firm A performing better than the industry average? Similarly, if you're studying firm B, you wouldn't compare it to C, which is the worst firm in the business. You'd want to compare it to A and D. Why is my company, firm B, underperforming the peers? All right, the answer to this question of how to achieve competitive advantage and what's gone wrong with disadvantage is due in part to Michael Porter, and I'm going to focus on Mike Porter's work here primarily in giving this lecture here. The original source is Competitive Strategy, the book that he originally published in 1980. It was reissued in 1998. And then he developed these ideas much more extensively in Competitive Advantage, which was a book that was published in 1985. I'll as well give you some thoughts and ideas on how our thinking about competitive advantage has evolved since these books were originally published. But this is really the centerpiece of the lecture today. Porter showed that firms have competitive advantages by definition if they achieve a higher return on assets than the averages in their business, and that they tend to do this in 4 general ways. They do this as broad cost leaders, broad differentiators, narrow cost leaders, or narrow differentiators. In other words, they end up in the corners of this matrix. This matrix is a map. It's not a graph or a scientific plot. It's simply a heuristic representation of where the firms in an industry sit relative to one another in terms of their position. The only line on this matrix that's really, well defined is that vertical line here, which represents the industry average price. Here, cost leadership involves charging less than the industry average price, and differentiation more than the industry average price here. Broad competitors serve the mass market, whereas narrow rivals pick off a particular segment and relentlessly focus on that segment to try to achieve a competitive advantage. So let me go into each one of these strategies in turn. Before I do, I want to also mention, Porter makes the point that companies that have disadvantages tend to be near the internal lines here. They're stuck in the middle. They tend to be neither well developed as cost leaders or differentiators. They tend to be in the kind of intermediate space where they're achieving middling prices and their costs are getting high, and they achieve low profitability as a result of that. So again, competitive advantage means being out in the corners on this matrix. All right, what I've got on this diagram here on the vertical axis is just the numerator in the ROA or ROS, ROE equation, namely net income, just price and cost per unit. So it's not the whole picture on return on assets, but it's, you know, the numerator in that equation there, okay? Price and cost per unit. On the left-hand bar, we've represented the cost leadership or low price strategy here. And what you're doing here with cost leadership is producing a product of acceptable quality at a lower than average price. The margin is pretty thin. You're driving your costs as low as possible, but you have to produce a product of acceptable quality, and the goal is to do that at a low price. On the right-hand side, we've got premium price or differentiators. These companies are producing a product of higher quality at a higher price and charging that margin, a larger margin over their costs in order to try to recoup a competitive advantage. Okay, the costs of a premium price product may be relatively high. So what you've got here are two different strategies, each of which can lead to competitive advantage, but the low cost or price leadership strategy involves, you know, creating acceptable quality. We never call it that, by the way. What we tend to call it in real life are things like great value for money or convenience or, you know, mass marketed products here. And the goal is you're not charging a lot of money on each thing you sell. You got to earn enough of a margin, though, that you can recoup across the volume of products that you sell a nice return on assets here. Differentiation is you create quality, and that quality generates and justifies the higher price. So all that matters here is perceived quality. It has to be that buyers are willing to pay a premium price for the quality that you've delivered. All right, let me go into each one of these again in a little bit more detail. I'll focus first on low cost, but again, the point here is both low cost and differentiation can be successful and lead to competitive advantage. All right, cost leaders here. Cost leaders of famous companies would be Anheuser-Busch, Home Depot, Walmart, Southwest Airlines, Bank of America in the banking business here. The goal is to invest in assets that lower operating expenses. So for Walmart, that's the distribution centers and the stores. It lowers their operating expenses to have this really dense network of stores that are all located around these distribution centers. Or for Home Depot, it's these large stores that are destination stores that hold a large amount of inventory on site. Or for Bank of America, it's plunking down an ATM and a branch office in the northeastern United States on every other street corner here. The goal is to deliver a product of good quality at the lowest possible cost here. So the goal is, you know, what you're doing here is you're saying, I'm going to trade off quality and perhaps not offer all the bells and whistles that a differentiator is going to offer, but I'm going to save money in doing that. So that's going to allow me to keep my costs as low as possible. So you get a lot of quality for what you pay when you purchase from a cost leader. It's not the highest quality that's available in the marketplace from a differentiator, but it's a good deal. And that's the idea of cost leadership here. You achieve above average ROA with relatively low prices, and you open up a pretty nice cost gap over your competitors. Now, the challenge for cost leaders is you have to maintain proximity in quality. You have to be close enough to the high quality alternative that your customers don't say, hey, this is shoddy product. This is not something I want to purchase. It's worth it to buy from the differentiator because the increment to quality is, you know, a lot compared to the increment to price. That's what you got to avoid as a cost leader. You have to make sure that you're close enough to the high quality alternative that your customers don't, even though they'd rather buy the least expensive product, they don't say, hey, you know what? The quality's just not there. It's not worth it to buy this crummy old t-shirt that's going to fall apart after the second wearing. I might as well pay twice as much and get a t-shirt that's going to last, you know, 3 or 4 times as long, right? That's the idea. So you have to trade off against product differentiation, but maintain proximity and quality, and that's the challenge. Okay, let me say a word now about differentiation. Okay, here the goal is to offer a service or a product that's acknowledged as superior in quality on at least one dimension. Raises this question of what is quality? quality is something that everybody agrees, or nearly everybody agrees, that more of the attribute is better. For example, we all want more durable blue jeans, or a more durable car, or a more durable product really of any type, more durable education here. We generally want something that's delivered more quickly. We want a better image. I'd like to have bundled services on everything that I buy. I agree that more bundled services are better. What constitutes a bundled service? Hey, you're going to provide me with financing. You're going to provide me with after-sales service on the car so that I can get a free oil change, something like that. If I have greater variety at the point of purchase, that's good for me. I can have a broader array from which to choose, or if it's easier to use your product, then that is going to create quality for me. The problem is each of these dimensions of quality costs money. And sometimes I don't want to pay the extra that it costs for the extra durability that a high quality car offers here. So the goal here is to create a superior quality product, and to make sure that the costs of incurring that quality are absolutely necessary and that we haven't wasted money in the process. There's another important point here, which is that sometimes there are technical trade-offs between dimensions of differentiation. For example, in the motorcycle industry, the most durable motorcycles were not the fastest motorcycles. The fastest motorcycles were not the most durable. There's a trade-off between speed, which is a dimension of quality. Everybody agrees faster motorcycles are better. And durable motorcycles. Everybody agrees that durable motorcycles are better. But because durability and speed trade off against each other, there can be one specialist differentiator that focuses on providing speed, even at a sacrifice of durability, and a second differentiator that provides durability even at a sacrifice of speed. So the goal to incur costs to create the quality, make sure that you're relentlessly focused on the dimension of quality that constitutes your strategy here. You've got to invest in assets to make sure that you're generating that quality for buyers, and you've got to maintain cost proximity to your competitors. Just as cost leaders are worried about maintaining proximity in quality, differentiators have to worry about maintaining cost proximity to those low-cost rivals. They're always trying to raise the bar on efficiency, and we have to make sure that we don't drift off into some situation where the cost of the extra quality becomes so great that everybody says, hey, I'd rather have the higher cost alternative, but the amount more that I have to pay is just so great that it's not worth it, so I'm going to choose the lower cost alternative. For example, you might have a buyer of motorcycles that says, hey, I'd really love to buy the fastest possible motorcycle, but it costs $30,000. I can buy the second fastest motorcycle for $10,000. The extra increment to quality, the extra speed is not worth that $20,000 difference, so I'm going to go with the cheaper alternative. Differentiators have to maintain that cost proximity. $30,000 is just simply too much for this buyer. So that's the example of proximity there. Okay, let's talk about unsuccessful differentiation. This is extremely common. On the left-hand side, these are the costs of the differentiator. On the right-hand side, I've got the prices. If you look at the prices first, you see the example here that the company has achieved the industry average price and then a premium on top of that. Let's say customers love the product. You might ask the question, why is this company losing money? Well, it's because it's gone beyond meeting the minimum requirements and gone beyond adding the cost necessary to differentiate to actually add a lot of gratuitous services that the buyers don't really value. And this is unfortunately incredibly common. You've got a company that's beloved by its customers, but too many gratuitous services, and it simply can't make money here. So a lot of companies that are successful at differentiation get caught in this trap and then ultimately end up with disadvantages. They become stuck in the middle, their costs are high, their prices are too low, and they're in trouble. Okay, so types of competitive advantage include now narrow low-cost focus, narrow differentiation-based focus here. So let me say a word or two about that here. Okay, focus strategy, you're exploiting the same fundamental type of competitive advantage in that you're either a low-cost competitor or a differentiator. The idea here is you're going to stay small. You're going to pick a segment, and relentlessly serve a segment with some sort of unusual need on product or geography and beat the broader competitor on that attribute by hiving off or attracting from the broader competitor those customers that want the particular attribute that you've focused on. Let me give you an example. Here at the University of Toronto, we have these food trucks that drive around at lunchtime that offer really good food on styrofoam plates with plastic forks for about $3 or $4 for a lunch. And you can get a nice filling, let's say Chinese food for lunch at one of these trucks. And they drive around. They're extremely popular with our budget-constrained students here. Okay, they are hiving off a narrow-focused, low-cost strategy here. They're pulling students away from going to the deli, from going to campus services where they might go through a buffet line or something like that and pay maybe $5 or $6 at lunch here. The students have to stand in the rain, stand out in the snow. They don't get a lot of variety here by buying from these food trucks, but they love it because they've lowered their food bill here. We don't get retaliation on price from the broad competitors because the number of students that still go to these broader competitors is significant, and the incentive for these companies is to keep their price at about $5 or $6 for lunch. But the food trucks do well at $3.50. So you've got a narrow target segment with unusual need for budgetary savings, and the Chinese food trucks do well. Differentiation example would be if we had enough customers willing to spend $30,000 on a super fast Ducati motorcycle, then you would have a sports motorcycle segment that's narrow, where the product attribute of speed is appealing to a large enough customer base that you can actually be successful. The same thing is true in geography here. So for example, in the airport here in Toronto, sandwiches are extraordinarily expensive. You've got franchises there that will charge you $12 for the same sandwich that you could buy at the grocery store for $5. How do they get away with it? Well, they have selected a narrow target segment in the airport with unusual needs. You're captive, and they're differentiated there. If I had my act together and brought my lunch from home, I could get the same quality for a much lower price. But the quality at the airport includes the access to the sandwich at the point of takeoff. So that's why they're able to get away with this. All right, so you configure the organization to serve only the targeted segment. That Chinese food truck can't really grow. It's constrained. It can't create additional lines of business. It's sacrificing incremental business. The advantages lies in being small, being able to drive across campus to where the demand exists in any one place and time here. Same thing, Ducati motorcycles here in this example is sacrificing selling other kinds of motorcycles because its advantage or its mystique lies in its selling only those sports motorcycle. So it's the narrowing of the scope that creates that cost or differentiation advantage. It's staying small that allows the company to basically what David Yaffe called judo strategy. It's not attracting a retaliation from one of the broader competitors. It's been it's created its advantage through the narrowing of scope. Why not pursue both low cost and differentiation? Well, you know, when I was a rookie, I used to think, well, maybe that's possible here. But what I've learned is that in many industries, those two things are inconsistent with one another. What happens is if you try to charge a premium price and at the same time cut your costs, you end up angering your customers, and you have to chase them ex post to try to recover your reputation, and that ends up being costly. You may even have to lower your price, and you end up with a low price and high costs, namely stuck in the middle with a competitive disadvantage. Sometimes you can achieve both. You have a major innovation, such as when Microsoft came out with Windows. It had relatively high prices, $50 per copy on Windows 95, and low costs of development here. It had lopsided share advantage. Sometimes you can achieve both through interrelationships between businesses, such as when Procter & Gamble was making fluff pulp, using fluff pulp to make disposable diapers and paper towels and bathroom tissue. All these relationships between the businesses allowed it to lower its cost, but Procter & Gamble was primarily a differentiator here. What's happening in these examples is that you don't have capable competitors yet. Your competitors are stuck in the middle. So as soon as your competitors become capable and sort of redesign their strategies, here you have to choose. And making sure that you plan for that is the essence of competitive strategy here. So very, very difficult to pursue both low cost and differentiation. I should add that in our 2x2 matrix, the most common way in which companies grow is from narrow to broad. Moving across that center line between low cost and differentiation is very, very difficult and dangerous. So it's moving from narrow to broad. That's the most common repositioning that we see. That involves sometimes a 10 or even longer, 10-year or even longer investment here. For example, the Boston Beer Company, when it went from being Boston's microbrewed beer, went to being a national beer, had to configure new breweries around the country, build new distribution relationships, create a national brand. All of that required a considerable amount of investment, and of course it also had to lower its prices because it was now competing on different terms. So moving from narrow to broad is the most common transition, but by no means is this something that any company can take for granted. Okay, that's the word on competitive positioning. Thanks very much for your attention.